This is my true story. I took care of my brother's son like he was my own child. I gave him food, shelter, love, everything I had. But one morning, he looked me in the eyes and said, "Get out, old man." He threw me out of the very house I built with my own hands. I walked away with nothing but my walking stick and the truth he didn't know. 2 weeks later, I watched him tremble in court as the judge read my secret letter. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. That house was everything to me. I started building it when I was still young and strong, back when my hands could lift more than my heart could carry. Every brick, every nail, every wall carried a story. I didn't have money for fancy workers or big machines. I built it piece by piece after long shifts, with borrowed tools and blistered palms. When it rained, I worked through the mud. When it was hot, I wiped the sweat off my face and kept going. It wasn't just a house. It was the proof that I had survived life's cruelty. Every tile on that roof was a memory, every window a dream that I refused to give up on. I thought it would one day hold laughter, love, and family. I thought it would protect those I cared about long after I was gone. I didn't know then that it would be the same house that would one day throw me out. When my brother died suddenly, everything changed. His son was still small, barely a teenager, lost and angry. I promised my brother at his funeral that I would take care of his boy. I brought him into my home, into that same house I built from dust. He slept in the same room where I once dreamed about building a family of my own. I treated him like the son I never had. I gave him my name, my food, my time, my care. I taught him how to read, how to fix things, how to be a man. When he got sick, I stayed awake all night, holding his hand, whispering that everything would be okay. I never complained, never asked for anything in return. I was proud of him, proud to give him a life better than the one I had. The house became more than a shelter for us. It became a home filled with shared meals, small arguments, laughter that made the walls feel alive. I fixed the roof when it leaked, painted the walls when they cracked, planted flowers by the porch to make it look warm and alive. Every day I thanked God that I had something to pass on to him, a roof, a place, a name. I used to imagine growing old there with him by my side, maybe hearing his children run through the hallways, calling me Grandpa. I imagined dying peacefully in that house, knowing it would stay in good hands. I didn't know those same hands would one day push me out the door. Years passed, and he grew older. I paid for his school, worked double shifts so he could study. When he graduated, I cried like a proud father. I told everyone in the village that my nephew was going to make something of himself. I even sold a small piece of land to help him start his own business. I didn't care about money. I cared about his future. I thought that love would come back to me when I needed it most. But I was wrong. Love doesn't always come back. Sometimes it turns into something unrecognizable. As time went on, I started to slow down. My back hurt, my eyes dimmed, my body couldn't do what it used to. The house I built began to feel too big for me, too quiet. I thought he would take care of it, and me. But slowly, I began to notice how he changed. He stopped calling me uncle. He started calling me old man. He spent less time at home, more time around people who looked down on me. He started acting like he was the one who built everything, as if I was just living there out of charity. It broke something inside me, but I stayed quiet. I thought he was just lost, just confused, just young. That house, the one I built with sweat and love, became a place where I began to feel like a guest. I'd hear him talking to his friends, saying things like, "When the old man's gone, this house will be mine." They laughed, and I pretended not to hear. I'd walk into my room and sit in the dark, my chest heavy, wondering how love could turn into greed so fast. The walls that once held joy now held shame. I'd touch the same bricks I laid years ago and feel nothing but emptiness. I built a home for a family, but what I got was a house full of betrayal. Even then, I didn't hate him. I couldn't. I told myself maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe he just needed time to understand. I kept believing the same lie every parent tells themselves, that children, no matter how cruel, will one day remember love. I was wrong again. Because one day, the house that was my whole life became the place where my life ended as I knew it. I gave that boy everything. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I raised him like my own blood. I made sure he never slept hungry. I made sure he had clean clothes, school books, shoes that fit, and a safe bed to lie in. I worked in the fields, in factories, in construction, anywhere I could, just to give him the life I never had. When he got older, I helped him get a job in the city. I gave him my savings so he could move there. I told him, make something of yourself. I thought he would remember that I thought he would carry that love with him. But the truth is, the moment he found comfort, he forgot where it came from. That is how ingratitude grows. Not overnight, but slowly, until it eats away the heart. At first, I didn't see it. When he came to visit, he'd bring gifts, shirts, a watch, some food. He'd smile and call me uncle again. I believed he still cared, but those visits became shorter, and his words became colder. He began to look at me like I was a burden, not a blessing. He stopped asking how I was. He started talking about money, business, and property. Every time he came home, he looked around the house like he was measuring it. Not remembering it was where he grew up, but seeing it as something to own. I could feel it coming. That distance, that unspoken greed. But I told myself not to judge him. I wanted to believe there was still goodness in him. I didn't realize that goodness had already been replaced by hunger for what wasn't his. The day I fell sick, I saw his true heart. I couldn't work for a while, so I asked him for help. Not money, just time. I asked him to visit more often, maybe help me with the groceries or fix the roof that was leaking. He said he was too busy. He said he had his own life now. I understood, or at least I tried to. I told myself that young people have their own paths, but a small voice inside me whispered, "You raised him too soft. He forgot who carried him through the hard times." That voice was right. He didn't just forget. He erased me. Soon, I started hearing things from neighbors. They said he was telling people he would inherit the house soon, that I was old, that I couldn't manage things anymore. One man even said my nephew called me the useless old man who just sits and takes up space. I didn't believe it at first. I told the man he was mistaken. But then, I saw it myself. I saw the look in my nephew's eyes when he came to visit next. It wasn't love. It wasn't respect. It was calculation. The kind a man gives to something he already thinks he owns. He stopped visiting for months after that. When I finally called him, he sounded annoyed. I told him I missed him. He sighed and said, "Uncle, I'm busy. Don't call me all the time." Those words stuck in my head. The boy who once ran to me crying for help now sounded like a stranger. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. That night, I didn't eat. I stared at the wall, realizing that somewhere along the line, love had turned into debt, and I was the one paying it. The next time I saw him, he didn't come alone. He brought a lawyer. He said they were just checking paperwork. I smiled politely, but my heart began to race. I saw how he looked at the documents, scanning them with greed in his eyes. He asked small questions. Who owned what? Where the deeds were kept. I played along. I answered softly, as if I didn't notice what he was doing. But inside, I felt my chest tighten. The boy I raised wasn't there anymore. The man sitting in front of me was a stranger wearing his face. After that visit, he stopped hiding it. He told people in the neighborhood that I was getting old and should start thinking about retirement. Retirement? From what? From living? From breathing? He started treating me like I was in the way, like I was holding him back from something. He forgot that without me, he'd have nothing to move forward with. I could feel his frustration every time he came around. He wanted me gone. I saw it in his eyes. He wanted my house, my land, my silence. And I gave him all but one, my silence, because deep down, I already knew what was coming. That's when I started writing the letter. Quietly. Late at night. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it out of truth. I wanted to make sure that when the day came, and I knew it would, he'd learn that not every old man dies helpless. I had given him everything out of love. But the last thing I would give him would be a lesson. The day it happened started like any other. The sun was out, the house was quiet, and I was sitting on the porch sipping my morning tea. My knees hurt, as they always did, but I still managed to smile because it was the only thing left I could control. I had cleaned the yard the day before, wiped the dust off the windows, and cooked a small meal in case my nephew came by. I didn't know that the same door I kept open for love would be the one that threw me out. It was just before noon when I heard his car stop in front of the house. My heart lifted for a second, thinking maybe he was here to visit, maybe to check on me. I wiped my hands and stood at the door, ready to welcome him. I didn't expect the storm that came with him. He walked in without greeting, eyes sharp, jaw tight. There was anger in his face, the kind that doesn't come from pain. It comes from greed. He didn't even look around or sit down. He just stood there, breathing hard, like he had come prepared for a fight. I asked what was wrong, but he didn't answer. He started pacing, muttering about his house and his right. My stomach turned cold. I tried to calm him, to remind him of who I was, what I had done for him. But he didn't want to listen. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he wants to get rid of. That's when the words came out of his mouth, sharp, cruel, and heavy like stones. "You're old and useless," he said. "This house is mine now." I froze. My mind couldn't process it. The same boy I carried on my shoulders, the same boy I fed when he cried hungry, now stood in front of me calling me useless. He said it again, louder this time, like he wanted the walls to hear it too. "You're finished," he said. "I don't need you here anymore." I felt something break inside me, not a bone, but something deeper, the kind of break that doesn't heal. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. My mouth was dry, my hands were shaking. He stepped closer, his face full of rage, and grabbed my arm. His grip was hard, careless, like I was just an object in his way. He started dragging me toward the door. My cane fell, my slippers scraped against the floor. I kept asking him to stop, but he wouldn't. He pushed me, not with strength, but with hate. The kind of hate that burns everything it touches. My own nephew, my own blood, dragging me out of the house I built with my hands. The door was wide open. The air outside felt colder than usual. And then he said it. The words that will never leave my head until the day I die. "Get out, old man." He spat it out like poison. He didn't say uncle. He didn't say please. Just those 4 words. "Get out, old man." The door slammed behind me so hard that the sound still rings in my ears. I stood there, barefoot on the dirt, my knees trembling, my heart pounding so loud it hurt. I looked at the house, my house, and all I could think about were the years I spent building it, the nights I slept hungry so he could eat, the promises I made to his dead father that I would raise him like my own. And this was the return. This was the thanks. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. It was a kind of pain that went beyond crying. Neighbors watched from their windows but said nothing. No one wants to get involved when family turns cruel. I stood there for a long time, holding my cane, staring at the door that had closed on me forever. Finally, I turned away. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't bear to. Every step I took away from that house felt like a step away from everything I ever loved. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked until my legs gave out. That night, I slept under a tree near the road. The stars were bright, but they felt like strangers too. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I just lay there thinking about how life can turn from love to cruelty. Without warning, I thought about my brother. How disappointed he'd be if he saw what his son had become. I thought about how I gave everything I had, and in return, I was treated like garbage. But as I stared up at the sky, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't die with bitterness. I would die with truth. And that's when I remembered the letter, the one I had written years ago, the one that would make him face what he had done. When that door slammed behind me, it felt like the sound of my whole life breaking apart. I stood outside, the man who built that home now standing in the dirt like a stranger. My knees were weak, but I didn't fall. I just stared at the wooden door that I carved myself decades ago. The same door that once opened to welcome me in now, closed to keep me out. The walls I painted, the porch I fixed, the roof I mended during storms. All of it was now his world, not mine. My breath was heavy. The air felt thick. It was like the house itself was watching me, but without mercy. I picked up my cane, adjusted my shirt, and told myself not to cry. But the tears came anyway. They burned my face. I didn't cry because I lost the house. I cried because I lost my family. I cried because love had turned into hatred right before my eyes. I walked down the road with nowhere to go. My legs trembled, but I didn't stop. I didn't want anyone to see me fall. The neighbors who peeked from their windows quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Nobody wants to be part of another man's shame. Every step I took away from that house felt heavier than the one before. I could still hear his voice in my head. "Get out, old man." That voice played over and over like a cruel song. I wanted to scream back, to tell him what that house meant to me, what I had sacrificed for him. But I stayed silent. There's no point talking when love has already died. When I reached the end of the street, I turned back once, just once. I saw him through the window, already inside, walking around like he owned the place, my house, now his prize. My blood boiled, but not with anger, with disbelief. I had raised a boy who couldn't even see the difference between inheritance and betrayal. I had built a home, but I had raised a heart made of stone. I stood there watching until the light inside went out. Then I turned around and kept walking until I couldn't see the house anymore. That's when I whispered to myself, "It's not over." Because deep inside, I knew something he didn't. That house was still mine. The papers said so he could kick me out, but he couldn't erase the truth written in ink. That night, I didn't have a bed. I found an empty shed near the edge of the village and sat on the cold floor. I didn't light a fire. I didn't eat. I just sat there in silence, listening to the sound of my own heart beating. Every beat reminded me of that shove, that voice, that door. I thought about all the years I spent protecting that boy, feeding him, teaching him right from wrong. I wondered how a person could change so much. Maybe I had spoiled him too much. Maybe I gave too much love to someone who didn't know how to value it. Or maybe cruelty doesn't come from how people are raised. Maybe it's just something already inside them, waiting for the right moment to come out. As the night grew colder, I pulled my old jacket tighter. My body hurt, but I didn't care. My pain wasn't in my bones. It was in my chest. I had never felt so unwanted in my life. I had no one left. My brother was gone. My friends were gone. And now, the boy I treated like my own had turned me into nothing. I closed my eyes and saw my brother's face. I could almost hear him say, "Take care of my son." I wanted to scream back at him. I did, but he destroyed me. But the words never came out. Only tears did. The next morning, I walked to the bus stop with no plan. I just knew I couldn't stay there. I went to a nearby town where no one knew my story. I found a small room to rent and started living quietly, like a man waiting for time to forget him. But deep down, I hadn't given up. I carried a secret with me. A secret written in that letter, locked in my old safe. I had written it long ago, back when my hands were strong, back when my mind was clear. I didn't write it out of anger. I wrote it for justice. Because I knew this day would come. I knew one day he would turn against me. That letter was my answer to his cruelty, the only voice I would need when mine was silenced. Days passed, then weeks. I heard from people that he had started changing the furniture, repainting the walls, throwing parties in the house. They said he laughed loud and called himself the new owner. I let him. I let him believe it. Because every laugh, every lie, every ounce of pride he showed was another step toward the fall that was waiting for him. The letter was still safe, untouched, sealed, and powerful enough to destroy everything he thought he owned. All I had to do was wait. He thought I was broken. He thought throwing me out meant he had finally won. But what he didn't know was that I had already planned for this day years ago. I saw it coming long before it happened. Not because I didn't trust him back then, but because I knew how greed grows when love fades. I had built everything with my own two hands. Every paper, every land document, every signature was under my name. He never cared to ask. He just assumed everything was his because I was old, but I wasn't foolish. I had spent a lifetime learning what cruelty looks like. I had seen men lose everything because they trusted too easily. I promised myself I would never be one of them. So while he walked around calling himself the owner, the law still whispered a different truth. I was the only legal name on that property. Many years ago, before he even finished school, I had gone to a lawyer, an old friend of mine. I told him everything. I told him how I raised my brother's boy, how I was giving him everything I had. But I was afraid of what he might become. The lawyer nodded, and he said something I never forgot. Love them, but protect yourself. That same day, we prepared the papers. I signed everything to stay under my name until the day I died. No transfer, no inheritance, nothing. And then we wrote a clause that would change everything. It said, "In the event of my death, or if I am ever forced out of my own property, all assets shall be donated to the state orphan fund." I wanted it that way. I wanted to make sure that if love ever turned to greed, the only winner would be the children who had no one, not the ones who forgot where they came from. I sealed a copy of that will and letter in a brown envelope, marked clearly with the words, "To be opened in court." I locked it inside my safe, the same safe he used to beg me to open when he was young, just to see what was inside. I always told him it was empty, just old memories. He believed me. He never asked again. He thought I was just an old fool saving scraps. He didn't know that inside that box sat the one thing that would one day destroy his pride. That letter wasn't written out of hate. It was written out of truth, because sometimes the only way to make a person see what they've done is to let the law speak for you. When he kicked me out, I didn't say a word. I didn't tell him I still owned everything. I didn't tell him that one day he'd be standing in front of a judge begging for mercy. I just walked away and let him dig his own hole. I wanted him to feel safe in his arrogance, to believe that the house, the land, and everything inside belonged to him. I wanted him to paint the walls, change the locks, live the illusion that he was finally free of me. Because when the truth hit him, it would hit harder than anything I could say. That's the kind of justice only patience can deliver. I still remember the day I opened that safe again after leaving the house. My hands were shaking, but my mind was steady. I looked at the brown envelope, untouched after all those years, and smiled for the first time since he threw me out. That piece of paper was my voice. It was the proof that I was never powerless, no matter how he made me feel. I packed it carefully, walked back to town, and handed it to my lawyer. He looked at me quietly, then said, "It's time?" I nodded. He didn't need to ask more. We filed the documents, sealed the request, and waited. Days later, I heard through neighbors that my nephew was already trying to sell the property. He had brought in a buyer, talked about prices, made promises he couldn't keep. He even boasted in town that he'd soon move to the city with the money. I listened from a distance, letting him build his little tower of pride, brick by brick, because I knew that tower would fall, and the letter I wrote would be the hammer. That's the thing about truth. You can hide it, ignore it, even laugh at it. But the moment it's read aloud, in a court, by a judge, in front of everyone, it burns through lies like fire through paper. And I was patient enough to wait for that fire. For weeks, I lived quietly in that small rented room. Every morning, I'd sit by the window, sip weak tea, and watch the world move without me. I had no one to talk to, but I didn't need anyone. I had peace, and I had patience. My nephew thought I was gone forever. He thought old age meant weakness, but I was just waiting for time to catch up with him. I stopped asking why he did it. Some questions only hurt when you keep repeating them. Instead, I focused on what would come next. I wanted him to taste the silence before the storm, the silence that fools people into thinking they've won. The village was small, and news traveled fast. I started hearing stories about how he was living like a king. He was throwing parties in the same house where I used to light candles in memory of my brother. He had replaced all my old furniture, painted over the walls I had built with my own hands, and bragged to anyone who would listen that the house was finally his. People told me how he walked around calling himself a self-made man, as if my years of work had been nothing but dust under his shoes. Every word they said stung, but I stayed quiet. I didn't tell anyone about the letter or the will. I wanted him to dance in his victory, to enjoy the taste of pride, because that would make the fall even harder. Sometimes at night, I would walk past the house. I'd stand in the shadows at the edge of the street, watching the lights inside. Hearing the noise of laughter and music, I saw him smiling with strangers, people who didn't even know the story of that house. It hurt, but I never stepped closer. I just stood there like a ghost, the builder watching the thief celebrate in his stolen home. I'd whisper to myself, "Keep laughing, boy. Your day is coming." Then I'd turn away and go back to my room. The nights were long, and loneliness was heavy, but I carried it. I had carried worse in my life: poverty, hunger, death, so a little more pain didn't scare me. One morning, I went to the market and saw his name in the newspaper. He was trying to register the property under his own name. My heart didn't race, I just smiled. That was the moment I had been waiting for. That one move meant the law would have to get involved. That one step meant the court would open the documents. The silence was about to end. I went straight to my lawyer's office and told him it was time. He nodded, opened a drawer, and pulled out a copy of my will. "He's walking straight into it," he said quietly. I nodded again. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel revenge. I felt justice getting closer, step by step. In the days that followed, I heard how he walked around talking about his plans, how he'd sell the house, buy a car, maybe open a business. He spoke loud, full of pride, never once thinking about the old man he threw out into the cold. People who once respected me now looked at him with admiration. It didn't bother me. I didn't need their pity. I didn't need their approval. The truth doesn't need noise to be powerful. It just waits, quietly, patiently, until it's ready to strike, and mine was ready. One evening, I sat in that small room, looking at the papers spread across the table. My name, my signature, my letter. Everything was in place. I could almost hear my brother's voice again, like he was there beside me. "You did what was right," I imagined him saying. Maybe he would have understood, maybe not. But I knew I had done the only thing I could. The boy I raised had become the man who betrayed me, and now life would show him what that meant. The court date was set. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because I was ready. I pictured the courtroom in my head. I could see him standing there, confused, scared, angry. I could see the judge holding the letter, reading every word I wrote years ago with my shaky hand. I could see the crowd watching as the truth unfolded, and I could see myself sitting in the back row, silent, steady, waiting for justice to speak for me. The storm was on its way, and I didn't have to lift a finger. The day of the hearing came. I woke up before the sun, my old hands trembling as I buttoned my shirt. It wasn't fear. It was something heavier. The weight of years, of betrayal, of waiting for truth to finally breathe. I didn't eat breakfast. I just sat for a while, staring at the wall, whispering to myself that this day was never about revenge. It was about respect. It was about the dignity an old man deserves after a lifetime of work. When the bus arrived, I climbed in slowly, each step reminding me that I was no longer young, but my heart still had fire. I sat by the window and watched the roads I once walked with him when he was a boy, roads that now led us both to the same place, but for very different reasons. When I reached the courthouse, the air felt thick. People moved around with purpose, papers in hand, voices low, shoes clicking on the floor. My lawyer met me at the entrance. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Just sit quietly. Let the letter do the talking." I nodded. I didn't need to speak anymore. My words had already been written years ago, sealed in that envelope that now rested in the judge's hands. We walked into the room. The benches creaked. The smell of old paper and polish filled the air. I saw him, my nephew, sitting near the front, dressed neatly, pretending to be calm. But his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. When he saw me walk in, he froze for a second. Then he looked away. The judge entered, and everyone stood. My chest tightened, not out of fear, but because this moment carried all the pain I had buried since the day he threw me out. The case began. The judge asked a few questions, his voice calm but firm. My lawyer presented the documents. He read out loud that the property was still legally under my name. My nephew tried to argue, saying I had given it to him, that I had promised it before witnesses. But promises mean nothing without proof, and he had none. Then the judge opened the envelope, the one I had sealed all those years ago. When I saw him unfold the paper, my throat went dry. I had written that letter with shaking hands, late at night, sitting by a small lamp, wondering if anyone would ever read it. And now here it was, being read out loud in front of everyone. The judge's voice echoed in the courtroom as he began. In the event of my death or forced eviction, the house, land, and all attached property shall revert to the State Orphan Fund. There was a long pause. You could hear nothing, not a cough, not a whisper. Just the sound of that truth landing hard on the floor like a stone. My nephew's mouth fell open, his face went pale. He looked around, searching for someone to speak for him, but there was no one. He had walked into that courtroom certain he would leave with ownership. Instead, he had just lost everything. The judge continued reading, explaining that I had made the donation legally binding. It couldn't be contested. It couldn't be overturned. It was final. The house that he called his, the same house he kicked me out of, no longer belonged to either of us. It would go to the children who had no parents, no shelter, no home. The house built by love would now serve love again. As the judge finished, I didn't look at him. I looked at my nephew. He was shaking. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his face red with shame and fear. He tried to stand, but his legs barely held him. I could see it in his eyes, the moment he realized he had destroyed himself. Not because I fought him, but because his greed had blinded him. For a second, he looked back at me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him, calm, steady, unbroken. He had taken my home once, but I had taken his pride forever. When the judge ended the session, people whispered quietly. Some looked at me with respect. Some looked at him with pity. I didn't stay to listen. I stood up, thanked my lawyer, and walked out slowly. The air outside felt lighter. The sky was gray, but for the first time in years I could breathe without anger sitting on my chest. I didn't win anything that day. I didn't gain a house or money or fame. But I gained something bigger, peace, and that was enough. When the hearing ended, he stood frozen in his seat. The proud young man who once shouted at me like a stranger now looked like a scared child who had lost his way. His lips trembled, his shoulders slumped, and his eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. He kept glancing at the judge, then at me, then down at the floor. It was as if the weight of every cruel word he ever spoke had suddenly fallen on his back. I didn't move toward him. I just stood still, watching the storm of regret hit him. The same boy who once pushed me toward the door, yelling, "Get out, old man!" now had nowhere to go himself. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. I saw his mouth open and close like he was trying to breathe underwater. For years, he had been surrounded by people who clapped for him, who called him smart, strong, successful. But when the truth came out, every single one of them disappeared. No one wants to stand beside a man when his greed is exposed. He turned to his lawyer, but even the lawyer avoided his eyes. I saw the moment he realized he was alone, completely, painfully alone. The same way he left me that morning when he threw me out with nothing. As he walked out of the courtroom, his legs shook so badly he almost fell. I could hear his breathing, short, sharp, desperate. People were whispering around us, their voices low but sharp like knives. "That's the man who kicked his uncle out," one said. "Now the old man gave the house to orphans," another whispered. He could hear them too. Shame wrapped around him like a noose. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel happy. I only felt tired from all the years of pain, tired from watching love turn into this, but I had to see it through. I had to let him face what he had done, the way I faced cold nights on the streets after he threw me out. He stopped by the door, finally turning toward me. His face was wet. His eyes were red. He tried to take a step closer, but I didn't move. He whispered something, but the sound didn't reach me. Maybe he said, "Sorry." Maybe he didn't. At that point, it didn't matter. Words mean nothing when they come after destruction. Apologies don't rebuild what greed burns. He lowered his head and walked away slowly, one step at a time, like a man carrying his own coffin. I watched him leave, and in that moment, I didn't see my enemy. I saw my brother's son, lost, broken, destroyed by his own choices. And that was punishment enough. Outside the courthouse, the reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward. They weren't there for me. They were there for him. They wanted to see the greedy nephew, the man who lost everything to the orphan fund. He tried to cover his face, but the lights were too bright. The same people who used to cheer for him now asked him how it felt to lose the house he stole. His answers didn't matter. He didn't have any. I just stood to the side, watching quietly, holding my hat in my hand. I didn't speak to them either. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken loud enough. Later that day, I heard that he went back to the house one last time. He stood in front of the gate, looking at it the way a man looks at something that used to belong to him but never will again. Neighbors said he cried. They said he shouted at the sky. But none of that reached me. I was sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, staring at my hands. These same hands had built that house brick by brick. And now, those same hands had taken it back. Not for myself, but for the children who needed it more. That's how life works. The same hands that give can also take away when they've been betrayed. In the following weeks, people told me he moved out of town. Some said he sold his car. Others said he started drinking. I didn't ask. I didn't care I had carried my pain quietly. Now he had to carry his. Maybe one day he would learn that money is not wealth and pride is not power. Maybe one day he would understand what I meant when I said, "Love builds homes, greed burns them." But until that day comes, he will remember the courtroom, the letter, and the old man who stood silent while his whole world collapsed, and that memory will haunt him longer than any punishment ever could. When the case was over, I didn't go back to that house. I had no reason to. The place that once held my dreams had already turned into a battlefield of memories. But the news spread fast. The same people who once looked down on me now greeted me with respect. Some said I was clever. Some said I was strong. But they didn't know that I hadn't done any of it for revenge. I did it to protect the little dignity I still had left. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to stop him from destroying everything I built. I didn't want my last years to be remembered as those of a weak old man thrown out by his own blood. I wanted the truth to speak for me. And it did. The judge's order came through officially 2 weeks later. The property transfer was finalized. The orphanage fund accepted it. They said they would turn the house into a home for children who had no one, no father, no mother, no roof. I went there to sign the final papers. When I saw the charity worker holding the documents, I felt something heavy lift off my chest. The pen shook in my hand, but not from weakness, from relief. I signed my name slowly, carefully, the same way I had written it on every paper that built that house decades ago. Except this time, the signature meant something bigger. It meant freedom. The house no longer belonged to me or to him. It belonged to children who would grow up under that roof with laughter, not greed. I imagined the rooms filled with small beds, books, and voices instead of lies and arguments. The same walls that once heard shouting would now hear songs and lessons. That was the justice I wanted. Not courtroom punishment, not public humiliation, but something pure, turning pain into purpose. When I walked out of the office that day, the sun felt warm again. I hadn't felt that warmth in years. The news reached him too. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I could feel it. Somewhere in another town, he was sitting with his head in his hands, realizing that all his greed had led him to nothing. Maybe he tried to curse me. Maybe he tried to convince himself that I was wrong. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had destroyed himself. People said he had sold his last possessions to pay his debts. People said he lived alone, silent, angry at the world. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't wish him pain. I only wished that one day he'd learn what I learned long ago, that wealth doesn't make a man rich, character does. Weeks later, I was invited to visit the house after it was turned into the new orphan home. When I arrived, I could barely recognize it. The walls were painted bright. The garden had flowers again. Children were running around the yard, laughing. The sound hit me hard. Laughter, where there was once shouting. I stood at the gate for a long moment, gripping my cane, feeling my eyes burn. The woman in charge came out and thanked me for the donation. I told her it wasn't charity, it was justice. She smiled and said, "Justice with kindness is the best kind." I nodded, though my throat was too tight to answer. Inside, the rooms were simple but full of life. There were toys, books, and drawings taped to the walls. One of the children came up to me and asked if I was the man who gave them a home. I couldn't speak, I just patted his head. In that moment, every ounce of pain, betrayal, and loneliness I had carried seemed worth it. My nephew's greed had taken everything from me, but it had also led to this, a house full of hope. That was the kind of victory money could never buy. When I left, I turned back one last time to look at the house. The sunlight hit the windows, and for the first time, it didn't look like a place of pain. It looked alive again. That day, I didn't walk with anger in my heart. I walked with peace. True justice isn't about seeing someone fall. It's about seeing something good rise from the ashes. That house, once poisoned by greed, now stood tall as a home built by forgiveness and truth. And I knew I had finally done right, not just by myself, but by the memory of my brother, by the children, and even by the nephew who needed to lose everything to learn what matters most. Now my days are quiet. I live in a small room on the edge of town. The bed is small, the food is simple, but peace sits beside me every night. I don't have the noise of arguments anymore. No shouting, no footsteps that sound like anger. Just silence. But it's not the empty kind of silence. It's the kind that lets you breathe. Every morning, I make tea, sit by the window, and think about everything that happened. Sometimes I still see his face. The way he looked at me that day in court, pale, lost, shaking. That image stays with me, not because it brings satisfaction, but because it reminds me how far love can fall when greed takes over. I didn't hate him. Even after everything, I couldn't. Hate eats you from inside, and I'd had enough of being eaten by pain. Sometimes people visit me and ask, "Don't you regret giving away the house?" I tell them no. I don't regret it for a second. That house carried too many scars, too many bad memories. It needed a new beginning, a new purpose. The children living there now don't know my name, and they don't need to. They don't know what the walls once saw: betrayal, shouting, cruelty. They only know laughter, lessons, and warm meals. That's all I ever wanted in the first place, a home filled with peace, not pride. When I think about that, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Calm. The kind of calm that money, power, or property can never buy. Every now and then, I still hear small bits of news about him. Someone told me he lives in another town, working odd jobs, quiet and distant. Some said he tried to start again, but the past followed him. Some said he still tells people that I ruined his life. Maybe he believes that. Maybe it's easier for him to blame me than to face himself. But I don't answer. I don't defend myself. The truth doesn't need noise. It stands on its own. I gave him everything once. I gave him a home, love, care, chances. And in the end, I gave him the biggest lesson of his life. That's enough. At night, when I lie in bed, I sometimes talk to my brother in my mind. I tell him everything. I tell him how I raised his son, how I failed to make him humble, and how I finally let him face his own choices. I tell him how the house now belongs to the children, how their laughter fills the halls. I imagine my brother smiling, not because I punished his son, but because I restored what family is supposed to mean. Family is not about blood. It's about loyalty. It's about respect. It's about standing by each other even when it's hard. My nephew forgot that, but the children at that orphan home live it every day. They share, they care, they lift each other up. That's what real family looks like. Sometimes I walk by the old road that leads to that house. I stop near the gate and listen. I can hear the laughter inside. The walls have been repainted, the garden looks alive, and there's no trace of the man who threw me out. It's strange how time fixes things in its own way. I don't walk inside anymore. I just look from a distance, smile a little, and keep walking. My part in that story is over. The rest belongs to those children now, and that's how it should be. I don't need to be remembered. I just need to know that something good came out of all the pain. When I look back now, I realize something I wish I'd understood sooner. Losing everything isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the start of seeing who people truly are. My nephew showed me what greed can do, but life showed me what truth can fix. I lost a house, a family, and years of peace, but in return, I gained wisdom. Real wealth isn't in what you own. It's in what you can walk away from and still keep your heart whole. My final thought, he told me to get out, and I did. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with my dignity, my truth, and my peace. He took the walls, but I kept the soul. And that was the real victory.